Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I made a video a couple of days ago, 2-3 days ago, about Conor Benn, saying how he gets on my nerves with his sort of wannabe gangster sort of attitude, and the fact that he tries to come across as being a real sort of street guy, Essex boy, whatever you want to call it, whatever the modern vernacular is. And of course, the truth of the matter is that I believe he, for the most part, grew up in Australia and Spain. He speaks fluent Spanish, and he's from obviously a very privileged background compared to most people. And there's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong in that. I wish I'd come from a privileged background, but I'm afraid it was, London housing estates for me. But I came from an estate. I used to tell Americans, well, I come from an estate, and they had sort of visions of, Downton Abbey, not realising what an estate really means. But anyway, Conor comes from a privileged background. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you're straight, as long as you're honest about it, and you don't pretend that you're, a roadman or some shit like that. But then I got to thinking, well, why does he do that? Is he just immaturity? I sort of put my thinking cap on, and I thought, what better fun than to play amateur psychologist? Now, I've said before, I work with a lot of people. I work with vulnerable adults. I spent years working with addicts, and maybe this is force of habit on my behalf, but I do like to do that. I do like to do a little bit of amateur psychology and see if I can find sort of come to some sort of conclusion about why people behave the way they do behave. And with Conor, I wonder if, because he's very close to his father, and his father always speaks highly of his son, and I wonder if Conor wants to sort of emulate him, if he wants his father's love, his father's respect, and he feels he has to behave like that. Rather than hold his hands up and say, I'm from a privileged background, I had it easy. I mean, you can accept that and still go in the ring and be very brave. And I would never say that Conor Benn is not brave for getting in that ring. He most certainly is, as I would with anyone who gets in the ring. But maybe he sees his dad, who did come from very modest backgrounds, and was an absolute killer in the ring. Like I've said before, I followed his whole career because I'm of that age. I saw him fight live when he was on the up and coming. I saw him at the Albert Hall, actually, on an undercard. That was one of the fights I saw. And the Albert Hall is coming back into boxing now, which is interesting. But anyway, I think Conor is desperate to exude the sort of menace and the sort of image that Nigel had. And without saying anything that could get me sued, and also the fact I don't think I've ever met Nigel Benn. I'm sure I'd remember if I had. But he was involved in, let's say he had some acquaintances who may have had a shady aura, shall we say. And Conor wants to, in a sense, he wants to be his dad while at the same time being his own man and having his dad's love and respect. I'm sure he's already got his dad's love. Now, that might be why he walks around, he's all tatted up, and you see him a few times. He's like at the Ring Awards, he had a black pinstripe suit on, like he was, Michael Corleone or someone. And then he, prior to that, when he got in the ring, he had the slick back hair looking like a bit of a Latino gangster. Remember that when he got in the ring with Eubank? And whenever he's interviewed, he's slagging all his potential opponents off. He's on Twitter taking the piss and being quite threatening. He's just coming across as being a very aggressive individual who's desperate to prove himself. Now, this is interesting because if you contrast this with Chris Eubank Jr., well, not contrast, but compare and contrast with Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr., if you remember, he's older than Conor. He's about 7 years older than Conor. Been a pro longer, obviously. But the first half of his career, he was very, very close to his dad. They went everywhere together. He did what his dad said. His dad essentially managed him, I suppose. Even at some point seemed to sort of be training or half training him. And then, for whatever reason, Chris Jr. decided, I've got to be my own man. I've got to get away. So they had a bit of a falling out. And, Chris went and did his thing. Now, Chris Eubank Sr., of course, a completely different character to Nigel Benn. Very, very eccentric. He definitely pretended is the wrong word. He aspired to be in something very, very different to his background, because he comes from very modest beginnings himself. If you're an older guy like me, you will remember his cousins, Peter and Simon Eubank, who were journeyman fighters. I believe one of them beat Barry McGuigan, was the first person to beat Barry McGuigan. I saw them fight a few times as well, but they were essentially journeymen. And then Chris came along and carved out, by UK standards, what is a legendary career. But he definitely comes from a background that he I wouldn't say he rejected it, but he kind of reinvented himself, if you know what I mean. And he wasn't, a lot of the criticism against Chris Eubank Sr. is that he was pretending to be something he wasn't, which in a sense he was. But he was doing it out of natural eccentricity, maybe to get away from his origins, or to kick against his origins, which you could argue is the same as what Conor Benn is doing. But with Chris Sr., he is, any kids he had were always going to view him in a, not a strange way, but they were, as they got older and they matured, they were going to view their dad as being, the strange cat that he is. I don't mean that in a disparaging way either. I like people like that. I like people that are, it's weird because Nigel Benn, when it was Benn versus Eubank back in the day, I was always very much a fan of Nigel, although I did like Chris as well, as a character. So on the one hand, there's the appeal of someone who is just transparent and honest, and they are what they are what they come from, their origin. On the other hand, if you get someone who is so eccentric like Chris Eubank Sr., they have a certain appeal too, because you don't know what they're going to do next, and they're very entertaining, and it's a lot of fun. And then you put the two contrasts together like you did with Nigel and Chris Sr., and you've got yourself a rivalry, which, unsurprisingly, because they were both good fighters, you put them together, you've got 18 million people watching it on terrestrial television, them fight. And their first fight was a classic. It was a brilliant fight. The second one was good too, but not as good. But to be honest with you, I think with Chris Jr., because his father is such a character, he felt the need to sort of escape from under the shadow of his father and to become his own personality, to find his own identity. With Conor Benn, because his father is, I think, back in Australia where he lives, and stays on the sideline from the word go. And I remember very vividly when Conor turned pro, Nigel was interviewed and he said, I'm going to let Eddie Hearn deal with that stuff. I've told Conor he's got to work hard, he's got to live the life, but I'm not part of his career. I've had my career. Because there isn't that type of pressure on Conor, he is able to, in a sense, in a sort of paradoxical way, remain close to Nigel, whereas Chris Jr., because he felt stifled by his father, he felt the need to break away. You see, sometimes if someone, sometimes people can put their arms around you, give you a massive big hug, but at some point they've got to let go. You want them to let go, even though it's done through love and affection. You might, okay, thank you very much. Let's go now. Let me go now. And you can feel smothered. So I think the contrast in characters between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. is very intriguing, even though it's, first of all, as I've said before, I'm not particularly interested in this fight because they're in different weight divisions, and I'm not a fan of these, what I call gimmick catchweights. I know catchweight fights have a long history. If you go back 70 years, not even that long, you get all sorts of catchweights happening, people jumping up from, welterweight to middleweight, as Conor has done, not uncommon back in the day. Someone like Coleman Basilio did it with Ray Robinson, just off the top of my head as an example. And if you go way back, you get Henry Armstrong, who featherweight world champ, lightweight world champ, welterweight world champ, and fought Cefriano Garcia for the middleweight title and got a draw, which a lot of people felt he won, but it's open to opinion. Then you got someone like Sam Langford, who fought from lightweight to heavyweight, although he never really weighed more than a middleweight, super middleweight maybe. Was never that big. But of course, heavyweights in those days were much smaller than they are now, smaller than modern day cruiserweights for the most part. So yes, jumping up in weight divisions does have a long history, but I think the dynamic nowadays is different. What with modern dieting, conditioning, strength and conditioning, all that stuff, legal supplements, and never mind the PEDs. We'll forget about that just for a second. But I think it's very different nowadays. So if you've got a genuine welterweight moving up to fight a genuine middleweight, it's a lot more strenuous than it was back in the day, however many decades back you want to go. So I think that I'm not a fan of this fight in itself, but there is a certain intrigue, not just because they're the sons of famous fathers, but because the contrast in characters is striking. Not as striking as it was with their fathers, and of course neither Conor Benn nor Chris Eubank Jr. have proved that they are anywhere near as good as their fathers. Their fathers were proven; they proved it in various fights, not just fighting each other. Both very good fighters, who, you can debate where they belong in the Hall of Fame, but I did a video about that, saying, is the Hall of Fame, I'm talking about the one in Canastota, New York, is it biased towards American fighters? I think it probably is. I think it probably is when all is said and done, but whether they belong in the Hall of Fame or not, Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. were extremely good fighters and both extremely tough men. Conor and Junior have not proven that they belong anywhere near that sort of status as fighters, but the intrigue comes obviously from the fact that they are the sons of their fathers and that they are very contrasting men. And I think also the build-up is going to be explosive. Benn's already started mouthing off, as he's always been doing. Eubank Jr. will do his usual disdainful attitude and say his piece. And there's going to be bad blood. I mean, imagine the press conferences. And that's going to soup up the whole fight. And before you know it, you're going to end up with, a colossal blockbuster of a fight. Solely for England, solely for Britain. Internationally, this fight doesn't really matter. But in British terms, they're going to make a ton of money. Lots of people are going to buy the pay-per-view. It might well do 1 million buys. You just don't know. It could be a very successful endeavour. And that's what it's all about. It's all about money. It is, after all, prize fighting. And Eubank Jr. has made no secret of the fact that he's after the money. He's got that Derek Chisora mentality, more so than world titles. But yeah, just a few thoughts on Conor Benn and Eubank Jr. So what do you think? Do you want to play along with me and play amateur psychologist? Why not? Give it a go. But comments below as usual. I'll give them a read. Thanks as always for your time. I'm looking forward to reading your comments. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you could do that'd be great. And also, if you like the video, hit the like button because you're helping us out. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We shall speak again soon. Bye for now.